Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app on Apple. We recommend Spotify or Apple Podcasts. On Android, we recommend Spotify. We want you guys to try to move over to Spotify. We know you like looking at us, but we appreciate the streams and the downloads. So check us out on the podcast feeds as well. Also, check out Off the Floor. That's our Discord server. That's $2.99 per month. Link right there in the description. Why not give it a shot for, the first couple days of free agency? See if you like it. 10 different channels and the host updates and stuff you're not getting anywhere else. Stuff ends up on Twitter, and everybody who's on Off the Floor is like, we saw that 2 days ago. And that's what you want. If you're a Heat fan, get off of Twitter. We'll move everything good from there over to here. Again, check it out. It's Off the Floor. Link right here in the description. Also, check out Prize Picks. Use the code 5 FIVE. Put down your 5. You get 50 to play right away. MLB, WNBA, golf, tennis. It's all there. Soccer until we get to football season and then back to basketball and the NHL. So check it out. It's Prize Picks, legal in the state of Florida. Use the code FIVE. And now, today's episode.
Mercy, luxurious, Heat Nation, yeah, Mercy and Lago, down to Biscayne, yay, five on the floor, ride for my dogs, where here's the thing, you can check the score, hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frauds, down to Biscayne. Kept the floor playing, got it all band. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat, we trust, it's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat, y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the Five Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
All right, it's Duncan Day. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick in the Five Reasons Sports. We got Greg Sylvander. You can follow him at Greg Sylvander. And for the first time in nearly a decade, I cannot look at Duncan Robinson and say, you're still here? Because for the time being, he's not, but he could be back. So let's get into the decision that was made today and what it could lead to, as we're now about 24 hours, a little over 24 hours away from the start of free agency. We will have all your coverage for you. Make sure you subscribe to Off the Floor because that's where it's all going to start. But we will branch out to playback, Twitter, YouTube, podcast feeds, and everywhere else that we are with the octopus, the octopi of South Florida sports media. All right, here we go. Duncan Robinson, explain, Greg, what he did, and then let's explain what this means for the Heat.
So what Duncan Robinson did was exercise what's called an early termination option in his contract, which basically gave him the flexibility and the control to basically tear up his contract. And that was there was for a really long time when we talked about the Duncan Robinson possibilities, and we'll get into like what happens next now that he did kind of tear up his contract and like, what does that mean going forward? Because there's lots of different implications, but primarily we've kind of discounted this option. And the reason has been that we all looked at what he was owed next season, which was $20 million. But for the sake of like all functional conversations, had the Heat waived him by July 8th, it would have been that he would have had at least $9.8 million coming to him, right? So there's a part of it where we thought he would be probably in this landscape where specialists sometimes can get squeezed out with money and stuff like that. He'd be foolish to turn that down. So we really didn't present this option of him terminating the contract as a viable one. And maybe we probably should have looked at it a little closer. I think that there's two things here that we'll have to key in on what it really means for them. But this, for the sake of the conversation today, you're right. He's not a member of the Miami Heat, and we'll get into kind of where he can go next and stuff like that, because I don't think it necessarily means he's gone for sure at all. But yeah, this is the day where I don't think a lot of Heat fans thought he would exercise this, just because when you've got 20 to 10 million staring at you in the face and the NBA can be a cold league, And he's not necessarily coming off some sort of career year necessarily that would pump up maybe his value. You thought he'd play it safe and just hold on to the roughly 10 million that was guaranteed with that last year of his contract, but he has other plans, and I think that's where this gets interesting. But I'm teasing where it could go just so that we have a little more length to this episode.
Yeah, and on the other side of this, we'll talk about what they should do. There hasn't been a lot to glean, in part because Duncan didn't speak to the media on the last day. He was one of like 3 guys who didn't, which was unusual for him. So we really haven't had a handle on it. I know he's been at some Panther games and he's been in town some. I know folks who ran into him over the past couple of days. So he's been in South Florida for the most part, but we don't really get a sense of what he wants to do. I can tell you that the Heat have some interest in bringing him back. Some interest, okay? Not like over the top interest, but some interest in working with him on bringing him back on a new contract. Now, this does the Heat a favor in some regards. Now, first thing it does is for the time being, and this is why, again, there's been a good relationship between the parties over the years, so you would figure that there might be a solid that was done here, and that again leads to the possibility of bringing him back. But right now, the Heat are under the first apron. I mean, they're under right. I mean, this is clear
and the luxury
money
tax.
And the
they're
luxury
under the tax by nearly 14 million, and they're under the first apron by a little over 19 million. So yes,
Right.
You're right. Like financially, it helps the Heat in huge ways. Because if Duncan just were to say, "F this, I'm going elsewhere," like let's just say that that's why he ripped up his contract. The Heat now absolutely can spend their mid-level exception, their non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which is almost, I think, $14 million is the first year that you can offer. Right. So slightly north of what Davion got with his contract. So they can go and replace Duncan Robinson with a really viable option. But there's also other things at play here. But I'll kick it back to you. But it's huge that what he did for the Heat is financially a huge favor, and that's why I think there may be closer investigation needed there in terms of what's going to happen next.
Right, and this is before we know, and this is after they've agreed to terms with Davion Mitchell, 2 years, $24 million. But it's before we know what's going to happen with guys like Wiggins, Rozier, 2 players that I believe in Rozier's case they would like to move, but you don't want to have to attach an asset to do it when he's on the last year of his contract. And then Wiggins, who I think they'd also be very open to moving under the right circumstances. So that could change the financial dynamics here as well. Just a couple of things here, because I want to get into the opinions on the other side of this. But this does open that possibility, not only of just him walking away and the Heat then having some money to spend, which could mean, again, bringing back Alec Burks as a shooter, and then going out and getting someone else. So you could split the exception money if you wanted to. Mm-hmm. But here's the other thing, okay, is that, see, I'm torn on where you go with him in terms of rostering him, because on one hand, I've said, don't progress stop. Let this roster play itself out as a young roster. You know, Duncan is 31 now, right? I mean, not an old man for a shooter by any means, but he's been around a while. Remember, he broke in with the Heat kind of late. But then at the same time, a point that was made by Brady and has been made by Adele and has been made by others is that if you're going to give the young players any chance to succeed, you've got to have shooting around them. Mm-hmm. You got to have spacing around them. And this roster has no spacing. None. I mean, Tyler, that's it. And the ball's in Tyler's hands a lot. So that doesn't really provide a ton of spacing. But you're talking about Davion Mitchell coming off a career year as a shooter that, even though I wanted him re-signed and I'm comfortable with the number they signed him for, you cannot expect him to replicate that shooting. You just can't. You have to go into the season not expecting that and hoping that he does, okay, and working with him so that he does. Highsmith has made himself a passable three-point shooter, but he's not a sniper. Jaquez is not a good shooter at this stage. Jovic can be. We just, again, don't know what the role is for him. Ware is not. I know that there's hopes that he will become so, but I saw enough three-pointers that didn't graze the rim. And Bam, like that's you know how I feel about the Bam for three thing. Like, yes, he got better at it, but it's not what he should be focusing on. They don't have a ton of shooting. And the kid they just drafted, if he plays at all, seems to be further advanced as a passer and a finisher than he is as a shooter, although the form is there where you think he can become a pretty good NBA shooter. So, I mean, he shot 31% from three overall, right? So, like, we're not talking about somebody who's coming in as a lights-out shooter. And they don't have – the guys they signed, like settled third. Like there's shooting ability there, but we don't know what those guys are going to pop in anyway. There's no specialist that they brought in. There's
nobody that other teams are circling on the scouting report and saying, don't let that guy get the ball and get a shot off like
which
they
is
did
how
with
they
Duncan
felt with
Robinson.
Duncan. And one of the things is, and I understand that Duncan's not coming off his best season. If you could have stopped it before he hurt his back the season before this, I thought that was the best 4 months I've ever seen Duncan Robinson play in a Heat uniform. Like in terms of playmaking, everything else, he hasn't after the back injury, and then he had a different injury, but he was not quite the same in terms of playmaking, in terms of the things that we've seen. But even so, he was a player who did two things for them over the course of his career, and he'll deserve his flowers if he ultimately leaves. The one thing was you had to account for him. You had to account for him. He was a player who changed the way that defenses played, the way he played off dribble handoffs, and his relationship with Bam, which is important. Okay. That relationship extends off the court. I never saw the two of them work out without each other before games. We always knew Brady and I would be out there and be like, okay, Duncan's out there, Bam's next. Duncan's out there, Bam's next. Like this is, they had a routine. So there's a close relationship there. Again, Duncan and Bam are the two longest tenured players on the roster. For all the talk of running it back, and I know people are going to throw this in my face, looks like the same team as last year, blah, 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 blah. The only three guys who are still here from the bubble year are Duncan, Bam, and Tyler. Right now, Duncan's not on the roster. So how you feel about running it back basically is how you feel about Tyler and Bam. But the second thing that he did, he made their lineups better. A lot of their lineups looked better with him in it. And by the way, as we've talked about, they haven't always looked better with Tyler in them. Like just in terms of the metrics. Like Duncan created that room for others. And that's why on a team with no shooting, even though I'm saying go young, I'm kind of thinking that, and I'll get to what Barry thinks about this, and I'll get your view on this on the other side of this. I'm kind of thinking that if you can get him back at a reasonable price,
you kind of need what he does.
Kind of need what he does. Like, I'm not talking about to win a ton of games this year, but to just give these the young players, like for whatever minutes Duncan's out there, some space to actually operate. I do think that matters. And that's why my lean is if it's at the right price, that you try to bring him back. But we'll talk about the right price. Oh, perfect segue. And by the way, do this today, okay? Because I can't guarantee this is going to be here for the start of July. We're working on it, but not right now. We have a promotion, Cash App, okay? Safest way to send money, all the different little effects, everything else that you can put on it. Everybody at 5 on the Floor has Cash App. Why do we have Cash App again? Because it's safe. You're sending to somebody that they're like, oh, that person looks sketchy. That's a Knicks fan. They will not really Knicks fans. Okay, Celtics fans. They will pause it. Okay, they'll then make sure that you're doing the right thing. So use Cash App. Download the app today. Send $5 to a friend. Use our exclusive code that's on the floor, and they'll send you $10. Okay, so basically you're doubling your money. Send your friend $5, and they're going to give you 10. And go buy a couple cups of coffee. So check it out. It's Cash App. Use the code on the floor. Got to download it first. Put that in the profile, and you will get the $10. Money matters, and terms do apply. All right, so this is Barry's take on it. Okay, and I think this does make some sense. He says, in my opinion, I would not do that. This means try to facilitate Duncan's return before seeing if there is any quality free agent. Barry used the capital letters. He's in full effect today. Willing to take the $12 million that Miami now has available with its full mid-level exception and seeing what you get for Wiggins and Rozier with the ability now to absorb a little bit more salary. In my opinion, the Heat today should thank Duncan. Again, this is at FLA Sports Buzz. The Heat today should thank Duncan for opting out, thank him for being one of the best shooters in franchise history. He's not one of, he was the best over a sustained period of time. I know Ray made the best shooter in franchise history. And their second best undrafted rookie find in history behind UD. I agree with that as well. That's an episode we're going to do, but I think that's where this will fall. And then try to maximize this unexpected $12 million under the tax by finding, capital letters, Barry is banging the table, the best possible player. You agree with that?
I mean, I agree with it in spirit, but I guess I would just say, like, I want to caution everyone's level of excitement on the Heat's ability to go out with a mid-level exception and spend it right now. And here's why. You have to ask yourself this one question. Why would Duncan Robinson do this? Why would he just terminate his contract and give up basically a guaranteed 10 million? But if the Heat, depending on what they were doing, although it looked pretty unlikely, he could have earned up to 20 million. Why would he just do that? And we said that he kind of did the Heat a favor. There's something to consider for this for Duncan Robinson. When he did this, he now has lost bird rights. Like if he doesn't work with the Heat.
Well, according to Brian Goins, let me just give you, because both you and I thought Brian was taking a break, by the way, but I guess not. We sucked him back in here. Brian Goins from Miami Heat Beat. I think the biggest factor for why Duncan exercises ETO is so that he could retain his bird rights. Duncan could have taken the guaranteed 10 million and signed a new deal after being waived, but risked the market drying up by moratorium. Now Miami can negotiate sign and trade. So what you're saying is
he would have lost them had he tried to go elsewhere right now. But by him doing so, it's not just a favor being done to the Heat. It's also he looks back at the Heat and may need the favor of his bird rights to facilitate a sign and trade is basically where I was going with that.
Got it.
So I still think that there's very much communication that's going to take place between Robinson and the Heat, because to get to his desired destination at the number that he wants, he must be pretty confident that there's a market out there for him, or the Heat and his representation have already figured out what he's going to come back at. And that's just something that we're going to find out here shortly as the moratorium, kicks off 6:00 Eastern on Monday. You'll start to see like kind of some of these things get agreed upon and such. So it's either that they've got a deal that they figured out, or Duncan has an idea that there's a market out there for him and he wants his bird rights to be used in a sign and trade. Because right now, if he goes elsewhere just as an unrestricted free agent, he's not the bird rights and the things that come with them, like higher raises and stuff like that. He doesn't get any of that, just signing with a new team with a new contract.
All right. So I have a thought on where he might think he can go. And Brian Fonseca put this on host updates of Off the Floor, and Brian, tends to canvass the entire league. Regarding shooters, Malik Beasley was in line to get 3 years for $42 million from the Pistons before his gambling investigation, for what it's worth. What we don't know yet is whether or not Detroit will pivot, whether Beasley will be disciplined, and if that means anything for Duncan, be it interest elsewhere, or upon resigning, what the number would be. Would think he would get less than 3 for 42, but gives you an idea of what shooting can fetch. It also gives you an idea of what Detroit might be willing to offer in a certain situation. And if you can get an asset back, that maybe you might do that. So I think as we look at it, and we had discussed all the options, we had Yossi Goslin on prior to discuss Duncan about 3 days ago. I think now looking at it, this is the decision that makes most sense for all parties, if there's a belief that there's a market for Duncan Robinson.
Exactly.
Right?
That was the key to it all.
Right. So there is a market for Duncan Robinson. And just to be clear to Heat fans, I was told that last summer, for everybody who wanted them to trade Jimmy and Tyler and all that, the one player who commanded they got the most calls about last summer, and part of it was because where he was in his contract and all the rest of this didn't require, obviously, the maneuvering that Hero or Jimmy or Bam would require. But the player that they received the most calls on last summer was Duncan Robinson.
So don't lose him for nothing.
Right. And last summer, they had traded him, and I've reported this before, they had basically agreed to trade him to Sacramento in what would have been a three-way deal that DeMar DeRozan was involved in, because DeRozan was supposed to go. When DeRozan was going to Sacramento, initially, Kevin Huerter was now with neither of these teams, but Kevin Huerter was supposed to be moved from Sacramento to San Antonio, in which case Sacramento would turn around and replace Huerter with Duncan Robinson by trading Harrison Barnes to Miami. That is what was discussed, okay? And it was seriously discussed. But what ended up happening was the Spurs decided they didn't want Huerter, they wanted Barnes. And so that took him off the table for the Heat, and also Sacramento did not need Duncan anymore. And then that's 2 days later, the Heat re-signed Haywood Highsmith because they were not going to be bringing in Harrison Barnes as another, potential, basically a 4. Okay. So that's just to be clear on this, that there have been opportunities to trade Duncan before, and the Heat have a very good handle on his market value. And apparently Duncan has a handle on his market value. And now the question is it better for Duncan to seek greener pastures, so to speak, and maybe more money? And worst case, the Heat are probably going to lock into getting something back, whether it's a second-round pick and an exception or something along those lines. Okay, exception, which they'll never use, but at least maybe you get a second-round pick back.
People are going to push back on that if they just let him go for a trade exception. But anyway.
Right, but you get a second-round pick back. Doesn't Detroit have, just for example, I think Detroit has one of Miami's second-round picks, right? Like you could get, I'll have to take a look at it, but the Heat have no second-round picks with the exception of like one. So they're all over the league, right? So yeah. So and we just saw what second-round picks got in the Durant trade. So even though I don't understand that one, but so what I'm saying is that there's a handle on what Duncan may be able to earn. And so this may be something that either leads to his return at a palatable number. I don't know. What would you say is palatable? 3 for 24?
Yeah. I mean, somewhere in that range. Yeah.
For a shooter whose base doesn't rely on quickness, athleticism, and gives you
the
spacing.
Taxpayer mid-levels for $5 million. So probably somewhere in the neighborhood of making that annually, I would think, right?
So 3 for 16, 3 for 17. Would Duncan take that when he just passed on 20? I mean, that's the thing. I don't know about that, but feels like it would have to be a little bit more than that. But what I'm saying is there is some number that I think they can come to if the sides are motivated to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that means Miami basically bringing back someone who's been a core part of their organization, understands their culture, which is all positive, has been, a good citizen down here, all those things, and is an elite shooter. Okay. When he's getting consistent time, when his back's right, and the value that may have for their kids playing with someone like that. Okay. And it's also the value it has for Bam. Don't forget that he's their franchise player, right? So don't forget that matters, keeping him happy. So he's lost a lot of friends. He's lost a lot of friends over the years. Derek Jones Jr., Josh Richardson. Okay. So I'm not saying he's lost friends, but he's lost them out of the locker room. So that's something to consider. But at the same time, it may make more sense for Duncan to go chase a championship with a contender, maybe at more money, and for the Heat to pivot younger.
Yeah. So and just the two things to close us out that from my perspective is I think that Duncan Robinson is probably more valuable to Miami than other organizations, even the ones going for a championship that need shooting, because I just will say to everyone, even though that everyone wants to go shopping with the mid-level exception, and right now they have the flexibility to do so. I don't know why Duncan does this unless he knows that there's either a sign and trade that's already happening or he's coming back to Miami at a lower number and the Heat needs shooting. So before you say, let's find a replacement for Duncan Robinson, the Heat really need what Duncan Robinson does. And so I think that it's him exercising this early termination option, to me, makes me feel like he's going to work together with the Heat. That's the vibe I get. That's not information driven.
And I just got a text as we're speaking that leads me to that same vibe. So I'll just leave it there as we're speaking. We're doing this stuff in real time. We're doing this stuff in real time. All right, Greg, appreciate it. Want to get it up before something else happens. So podcasts will keep coming. Appreciate you guys. Also, LeBron may want out of LA. You know who's under the first apron?
Thank you for listening to
Talk to you later.
On the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. After all, someone needs to listen to my dad.